about the options, we've talked about the cost of the options, and now we've been working for most of the time since we've been together on putting together the metrics by which we want to evaluate these options, or at least assess the individual qualities of the options. And Wanda has been leading that effort along with a group of folk. And so, Wanda, it's your turn to report on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's fair to say that all of the committee members have invested some skin in the game on this issue. So I'm pleased to report out what I believe is a set of criteria that reflect the interests and concerns of everyone on the committee. Let's go to the first chart. This is just a little bit of a revisit on the discussion that we had at KSC, where we talked about the importance of defining the basis for evaluation. As with any good systems engineering process, it's really important to nail down the requirements, which was captured for us by our charter and statement of task, and then assessing how you are going to be able to validate or verify that, in fact, what you've done meets those requirements. And so we felt it was very important to start off by a priori talking about what would be the criteria or figures of merit that we would want to assess. So in terms of defining what it was that we were asked to do, it was certainly to expedite a new U.S. capability to support utilization of the station, to support missions to the moon and other destinations beyond low Earth orbit, to stimulate the commercial space flight capability and engagement, and to fit within the current budget. So those were clear guidance and boundaries that were set for us from the outset. We also looked at some other metrics that were determined by the panel members as being key to coming forward with options that we felt answered the charge. And we also reviewed the metrics and figures of merit that had been used in previous studies. And the interesting thing there was that there was a lot of commonality with what we laid out and what others have done in the past about what is really critical in talking about human space flight for the future. I think it's important to also mention that not all of the criteria are equally weighted, and by that I mean that as you look at different options, there are some criteria that may have more weight or have more of an import on the effectiveness of that option than others. But I think it's also very important to say that this is not a quantitative turn the crank, run the numbers, and get an answer out of the bottom. That clearly there's a lot of judgment and other factors that have to be weighed. We will do that in our process as we go through our evaluation, and I believe that the other decision makers, when we deliver our options, will also have an opportunity to have a layer of assessing which criteria they weight and how they weight them. So that's the methodology that we've undertaken. Next chart. Also, when we're in KSC, I shared at the public meeting a little bit of the motivation of how we're thinking about this. And this is a 3D representation, or three-dimensional, if you will. But clearly in one dimension, you have the benefits to stakeholders, which you want to try to optimize. And you also have the reality of cost profiles that are laid out year by year in the president's budget that you have to try to meet. And our experience has been that when you constrain a problem fairly significantly, then the one dimension in which you have some option for movement, it is in the dimension of risk. So as you over-constrain the problem in the other directions, what you then do is increase the risk to the program and the ability to execute that program. So I think we all recognize that. Next chart. And for any option that you might choose, what you would find is that as you look at all the criteria in this three-dimensional volume, you'll see that these items move relative to each other. So they're not really independent. The size of the circles are just simply to indicate that, in fact, there's a level of uncertainty about them, that it's not a point solution, and that you've got to recognize, as we have with the options that we've tried to come up with, that different combinations may put you in a different position in that space. So here, again, the message is just one that it is not a black and white single point that we're trying to get to, but try to identify options that are in a reasonable space. The dimension that's not reflected here is that depending upon when you get a capability, may move that capability in this space relative to the other options. For example, if you don't get human lunar return till 2028 versus getting it in 2020, that you need to reflect that as well. So the bottom line is we need to make sure that we find options that are affordable, innovative, safe, and sustainable. So with that, let me have the next chart, and what I am going to do is walk through the 12 criteria that we have settled on. We had 11 when we were in KSC. We've added one to try to find a consistent way to assess all of the options that are going to be on our list of options to recommend or to evaluate. The first one being exploration preparation. Now, let me just take a second to explain the format of the chart. The top gray area of the box is just a short description of what we mean by that criteria, what's included in that area. Down the left-hand side is a relative scoring. So 0 represents the baseline capability. A -1 says that you don't deliver as much value as the baseline. -2 says you deliver even less. And similarly in the other direction, a 1 means that in fact delivers more capability or value than the baseline case, and a 2 says it's significantly better than the baseline case. So in the area of exploration preparation, the baseline means that we have limited beyond LEO exploration capability. And in some terminology, that would be flags and footprints, but not really a exploration program that meets the goals that have been laid out. Going to the top of the chart there, what you would expect to assess an option where exploration is limited to LEO, and in fact you don't have much capability beyond station or the space shuttle program, that would get a ranking of a -2. And on the other extreme, a +2 would be something, an option that provides operational robustness, it provides flexibility, it provides on-ramps for technology, and it provides an opportunity to explore different destinations beyond LEO. Next is science knowledge. And the objective here is to address the critical research areas consistent with the priorities identified by the scientific community. And for reference, we use the decadal surveys. We had briefings from representatives from that community, which were insightful in terms of understanding what the opportunities might be for scientific research. The baseline case here is limited opportunity for research that is in fact consistent with the priorities, but it lacks actually an implementation plan or an execution plan to fully leverage the opportunities that are presented. Going in the positive side, a +1 says that in fact you would address some of the priorities that the scientific community identified, and a +2 says that you significantly address those critical priorities with a plan and implementation and dollars to support actually the research that's there. The -2 category says that really there is not a plan for science research. It's not recognized as a priority for the program, for that option. Next chart is technology innovation. The focus here is whether or not there's an opportunity to enable tech maturity, as well as new modes of exploration as a result of technology insertion, and to, in fact, gain national leadership in innovation through technology. We feel that the human spaceflight program has the potential to provide that capability or that opportunity. The baseline case here says that technology maturation is in fact required to support the exploration mission. Going in the positive direction, a +2 would provide significant enabling technology innovation that could be applied to the human spaceflight program and beyond. And a -2 says that we use very current or very near-term technologies only. So, we would assess that for an exploration program as probably not reaching far enough. Yeah.
I'm sorry, just a clarification comment,
Sure.
and this is back on your previous slide, science knowledge. When we say significantly addresses many critical priorities of the scientific community, one thing that came clear in the presentations by members or chairs of the decadal surveys in the 4 areas where there are decadal surveys underway, earth science, physics and biology, planetary science, biology. One thing that was, and astrophysics, one thing that was clear is that many of their critical priorities, and in some of those cases, all of their critical priorities, they view as really not intersecting with human spaceflight at all. So when we say significantly addresses many critical priorities, I think implicit in that has to be a sense of those that human spaceflight can hope to address in a reasonable manner. We're not certainly grading against in earth science, they have 17 missions they want to fly, and none of those involve astronauts. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying that somehow we have to take over those missions. Yeah,
absolutely. And the other clarification I should have mentioned on that is that we're not using that category to assess research on humans in space, long-duration exposure, or any of those crew effects factors. That'll be captured under another category called expanding human civilization, which is the chart that we're up to. This category is really talking about our ability with these options to get to a presence off-planet, and it would enable, in fact, a sustained human presence and or bases. The baseline case here says that it would lead to a presence off-planet, and it would support research for crew effects, which would include radiation exposure, zero or low G, or psychological issues that would need to be worked. In the plus direction, it addresses those crew-oriented effects and with an objective to enable sustained human presence. And a +2 says that we're moving toward enabling a sustaining human presence off-planet, utilizing in situ resources. Or could also be used to enhance the protection of the Earth. In the minus direction, you'd have an option that, in fact, does not enable human presence. But a -1 would say that it would enable a visit beyond LEO. So there was some credit assessment there for getting beyond LEO, but not getting as far on generating that sustained human presence.
Wanda,
Sure.
I'm sorry, one more comment on this chart. I would add, perhaps it's implicit here, there's one other consideration with respect to the human civilization category, I think, which is, let's see, to put it in terms that we would rank numerically, I would argue that missions that go to near-Earth objects should be weighted more heavily, weighted in a separate category, but factor in from missions that help us develop sustained human presence, because missions to NEOs will help us understand how to mitigate the impact hazard, and that's important for sustaining human civilization on this planet in the long run.
Agreed, and it is implicit here that you can define the destination that, in fact, is on the path that gets you to sustained human presence or exploration to Mars.
Chris, would you make that a whole new category or part of this?
You know, it's folded in the +2 category here. I would just suggest that it sort of needs to factor in, you know, in the +1 category as well, at least.
Okay.
In my own head, when I was doing this, my thought was having that feature kind of bumps you up one in the category chart.
Yeah.
You know, whatever it is.
Sort of +1, yeah.
Well, another way to do it is to make it part of the title,
Including NEO.
yeah, so the whole chart.
Expanding and protecting human civilization, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
We'll have to be careful, because we don't want to, this is not meant to capture, you know, global warming observations or something, so we need to be careful.
But maybe you could do some wording that
I'm
That
sure I
way,
should
if it's a
have
tile,
before
you
now,
can
so-
rate each of the systems across the board against that.
Yeah, I think it's good to include it explicitly so that we recognize that
Right.
that is a valued characteristic of a particular option. Moving on to the next chart, economic expansion. The issue that we're getting at here is about assessing the impact the option will have on the industrial base. The vision would certainly be to have a growing, profitable industrial base, that you would look to see commercial engagement, and potentially an increase in U.S. development and production capabilities in key areas. The baseline here says that we would sustain the current U.S. industrial base with some new opportunities for engagement. In the -2 capability, what you would see is a diminish in technical capability. So this is not just in business base, this is not in dollars, it's about our technical ability, but no opportunity for commercial participation would get -2. On the +2 side, what you'd see is commercial systems being an integral part, or another way to think about it might be on the critical path of the architecture, where it's not just, if they get there, fine, but in fact, we are reliant on the commercial engagement in order to be successful to the exploration program as a whole. The next chart is global partnership. And this, again, is addressing one of the critical objectives given to us in our charter. But what we want to assess the options here is whether or not they leverage and expand our international partnerships. We had a lot of input during our public meetings from our international partners. And we need to identify, I think, in the options where they in fact support and really leverage those partnerships going forward. So the baseline case here says simply sustaining existing partnership. The +2 says we not only expand the relationship with existing partners, but consider adding new partners. And in the -2 says that the option really discourages further participation and involvement. The next chart is public engagement. And this is one
Wanda,
where...
may I ask you a question?
Of course.
On this global partnership or international partnership, are you thinking more in terms of political or world peacemaking implications, or are you thinking in terms of if you bring international partners and they bring value or money to these joint projects, our cost will go down, or both?
I think the real answer is yes and yes, that we think that there's an opportunity for both. We also would say that you would have to look at the opportunity as a quote-unquote money saver very carefully, because our experience has shown that you may have a hard time taking that to the bank to get a real visible cost savings. But clearly, I think when Sally was going through the options, we did not presume that an international partnership involvement in those options would save money and therefore take credit for it. But I think that there's certainly that opportunity, and the partners expressed a desire to increase their roles in this direction. I would say, on the other hand, space is multinational, and that there are things that we can benefit from in terms of collaboration and building relationships and established communications, and we've learned a lot and gained a lot from Station from that perspective. And so I think that the sense is that would be a good thing to assess the options in terms of the opportunity for increased partnership.
Thank you.
Sure. Public engagement is next. The focus here is motivate and inspire. It might also include educate current and future generations, and also to provide societal benefits, where the general public would see the benefit to society of the human spaceflight capabilities. The baseline case here says that we gained public interest and focuses on beyond LEO exploration. The +2 category says you actually galvanize a broad public interest and engage the public in exploration, and there's a number of ways in which you can have that. I think Certainly, the Teacher in Space program is one of the ways that we have attempted to do that in the past. The -2 category here says that we fail to capture or stimulate public interest at all, where the public, either fails to see the value or it fails to see that it's a good investment for us to be in human spaceflight for a particular option. Next is safety and mission success. This is, one of our key areas that we want to assess. It may be that, particularly when we talk about, your PowerPoint charts versus my rocket, that we don't have sufficient insight into some of the options at this point. But I think it is important to understand where we'd like to see the options, what we would assess to be a good option relative to crew safety and mission success. This also should be thought of as not just ascent safety, but end-to-end mission safety, so that you think about, the end game and what the issues are there. So the baseline here, again tied to the program of record, is a crew safety risk comparable to that which we have statistically on shuttle. In the +2 category, you really want to move the bar forward for crew safety, maybe as much as an order of magnitude. In the -2 category, what you're looking at is significantly increased risk of loss of crew or loss of mission throughout the life. Next chart is the life cycle cost or affordability. This is really looked at through 2020, consistent with the program of record. But it also reflects the fact that we need to look at the human spaceflight program in concert with other national needs, that clearly that there's not an unlimited budget here. And so I think the less constrained budget that Sally talked about takes that into consideration, as to say that there are some limits. The baseline here is very simple. It meets the president's budget. The -1 category, I think, is consistent with the less constrained options that we've been looking at, and the -2 is probably more like the unconstrained or greatly exceeds the president's budget. I didn't see any options that were under the president's budget, so I don't think we'll be getting any scores in that category. The next chart is schedule and programmatic risk. And programmatic risk is really one of those areas in which a lot of factors can be included. But it's really about delivering a robust exploration capability on schedule. And there are a lot of ways in which you can do that. One is you can take content out. One is that you can make sure that your technology is sufficiently mature that you have very little technical risk. But there's also the fiscal risk associated with that as well. In terms of evaluating it, we focused on the schedule because we think that's a good indicator of the overall programmatic risk. And the baseline here is tied to the program of record, which is human lunar return in 2020. And so the other scores are relative to that target. What we're seeing is that, you may have options that provide no exploration before the 2030 timeframe, where we would give a -1 to something that provided exploration in the 2020 timeframe. Programmatic sustainability. The issue that we're trying to assess here is the likelihood of keeping the program sole, our ability to meet near-term and continuing visible milestones, to not only continue to get support from the public, but also from Congress and external agencies as well. One of the things that has the potential of having value, if we had an option that really engaged industry and external agencies, for example, DOD, if you could find an option where there was an opportunity for synergy there, we would look at that as being an option that had a benefit. If, in addition to that, you also had broad additional support from the international partners as seeing value, we thought that would be something we'd want to assess. The next chart is actually two charts that we're going to talk about on critical skills and the impact on the workforce. The first one is really talking about the technical capability and the impact on the nation's critical skills, our ability to be to identify our core competencies and make sure that we maintain those competencies, and our ability to develop new capabilities, new competencies. So the baseline here says that we maintain selected critical skills and expertise, meaning we identify those which we think need to be continued for the foreseeable future. In the minus direction, what you have is a significant loss of critical skills and expertise in areas that we still think are essential to being able to execute a successful exploration program. And in the plus direction is an option which allowed you to really strategically realign the workforce to ensure the availability or development of critical skills that are needed going forward. And Bo, you might make the point here that if you're developing skills in an area where you don't have experience, that might be viewed as more of a risk, but I think that for a particular option, we'll need to factor that in. The next chart is again about workforce, but it's really from the side of looking at the numbers of people in the space business, and for the most part, that's driven by the overall total budget. So again, the baseline case here is maintaining the workforce, and in the minus direction, if you had a greater than 10% decrease in the total workforce, that's industry and NASA, because of a particular option, you would rate it that way. And a +2 would be if you had a greater than 10% increase in the total workforce in human spaceflight. We've had the comment earlier today that clearly we have been through that in different industries and different times, but we think that it was important to just lay that on the table as an assessment that could be factored in.
Wanda, quick
Yeah.
question.
Sure.
Because this is something we've gone around on, and I'm not actually sure where we ended up.
Okay.
If a job moves from a NASA badge to a company badge, or from a guy wearing a company badge to a guy wearing a NASA badge, is that neutral on this chart?
In this chart, it's neutral because we're looking at total workforce.
Thank you.
Yeah, total U.S. capability. Okay, the next chart just is a summary with the... Sure.
Could we go back to this previous chart? It seems to me that the best scenario is where you maintain critical skills and you change over between old program and new program without either increasing or decreasing. Wouldn't that be like +2? You're saying that, if you have an increase by more than 10% in a NASA workforce, it's a +2. Mm-hmm. If it's decreased by more than 10%, it's -2. So I would think that would be, the optimum scenario would be you've got these critical skills, you recycle them onto the new program, and I would have thought that they would be +2. Am I off the base?
I think that there's a couple of ways of looking at that. One, Bo, might be efficiency. Are you doing things smarter? Are you working smarter? You might still actually get a decrease in total numbers, but you actually may get a better product, or you get to modernize the way in which you approach something. So I think that, this evaluation is really just trying to account for the change in numbers. It's not trying to pass judgment on whether it is good or not good, but just to simply make sure that we recognize that a particular option may be having an impact.
But you give, this rating would give a program that increases NASA workforce positive credit. Is that right?
In terms
Sarah,
of
do you guys
increasing the
agree with
workforce.
This is NASA, I asked that earlier, though.
It is NASA and industry.
This is the national workforce.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got two charts that
Okay.
I'm having. Could we look at the other chart for just 1 second? Actually, I think we got the titles. This one should be the National Critical Skills Impact. Would be a better title for it.
It says impact on nations
It
critical
means the
skills.
same thing, but it's the whole nation, and it is critical skills in everyone.
Right.
I think it's the title that's the problem. National Critical Skills Impact, and the next one would be the NASA Workforce Impact,
Right.
or the total national workforce impact. National Workforce Impact. Or just Workforce Impact would be better yet.
Yeah, we can certainly change the previous
Yeah,
chart to be
we can
national
change the
critical
title, it
skills.
doesn't change the rating any, because
Yeah,
that's, okay?
okay. Go ahead, Joe. Next chart. These two are just summaries to remind you of the general measure and to give it a quick reminder of the criteria involved. Next chart. We want to look at the options against each of these measures. And the last chart, this is where I pass it over to Ed and say, you know, all you got to do is fill in the answers, and
The professor brought the back of the book.
there we go. Super. Yeah, Bo?
One last question from me. Have we captured promoting education or promoting learning at all levels? I mean, from my daughter's 4th grade to Dr. Crowley's graduate students. Because I don't think we captured that, you know, the effect of the program to promote learning or promote education.
We did in the, we tried to reflect that in the public engagement, where,
I looked at that.
and it may be that you want to be more specific, but, you know, the item 1 there is really about motivating STEM. It's aimed at being current and future generations. So the intent was that that would be where you would look at an option to see its ability to, you know, have an impact with the public in that respect. If you have a suggestion for a way to present that more directly, you know, we can.
Sally, you have an impact on education, I believe, you know. Seriously, you think we ought to have something that give program credit that inspire kids as well as his graduate students, you know?
Of course, that's important and it's critical, and I think that it's one of the things that a well-designed space program does naturally and can significantly contribute to. I think that it's captured appropriately here.
You think? Okay.
I do.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if there are no other questions, I'll yield the podium to Professor Crawley.
I think you've done very well. We'll let the professor fill out the chart here, which
Well,
he's
Yeah.
doing.
The professor just realized that they only call me that when I'm in trouble, by the way.
Oh, do they?
Yeah, you know, it's like when your mother calls you by your full name, you know?
That's not good, right?
Absolutely.
That's not good.